Let's continue trying to piece together the story for you. Bring in now the head of communications at the City of Ekurhuleni. That's Phakamile Mbengashe, who joins us via our video link. So it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. There are so many questions, and I hope just for the interest of the public, we'll be able to wade through some of them. As a start, who owns this property?
Good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to your viewers. The property is owned by the City of Ekurhuleni through our agency called the Ekurhuleni Housing Company. These are low-cost rental stock that the rent is subsidized to residents in the middle. You know that there's a category. Usually it's residents who are unemployed, but there's also residents who earn a lower income. So this is a subsidized.
Right. And I suppose, and we'll get back to some of the details around the subsidy because that correlates with what some of the residents there are saying. Are these evictions authorized by the city?
No, they're not authorized by the city. These are a result of a court order that was handed down on the 26th of June 2025. As a city, we've been issuing notices to residents, informing them of the eviction. We obviously don't give a date, but a time lead between June and now was for them to prepare themselves, because as the court has found that these buildings and some of these rental stocks are being occupied illegally, which means that the city is not collecting any or services from the residents of the buildings at the moment.
All right. And so I suppose then the question becomes, okay, so you say they have been given notice. For how long has the city been giving them this notice through the courts?
As I mentioned, the court order was issued on the 26th of June. So between the 26th of June to date, we've been issuing notices informing them that there is an eviction that is going to take place. The court found that these buildings are being occupied illegally. So now the city is actually not running the eviction. It's being run by the sheriff of the court. We are here to support in terms of EMPD and SABC to ensure that we maintain law and order during this eviction process.
Are you satisfied with the nature in which these evictions have taken place?
Okay, and there's no eviction that I think one would be satisfied about. I think from our side as a city, part and parcel of this process is our urban renewal agenda. You know that many CBDs have buildings hijacked and are legally. So in order to revitalize our CBDs, such as Germiston as well, we need to make sure that people are occupying these buildings are doing so legally and that they are the rightful owners or occupiers of these buildings.
The question I suppose that also comes about is when these residents essentially stopped paying this rental fee. I mean, some of them have told the SABC news channel that it's been over a decade. There's going to be questions around why this is happening now.
I think to be absolutely honest, remember, government, we are driven by the Batupili principle. As I said, the eviction is not a nice process. However, time has gone by. We have tried communicating. There has been consultation. The last resort was to go to court, and the court did give us a court order. Now, as I said, since June, there's been notification that there will be this eviction. Today is the day. Unfortunately, the situation became volatile. It became violent. As you saw, I'm sure that the Home Affairs building was scorched, and that's public infrastructure, which the public will have to pay for at some stage. And during the proceedings, there were 2 individuals that were arrested. There were some firearms that were shot. But law and order, let me just say, calm has been restored for now. Eviction is proceeding.
All right. In some instances, the properties that were being evicted were taking place, or in fact, those items were being taken out of these units in the absence of the occupants. I don't have sight of this court order, but I imagine there's going to be a lot of questions about the legality of that, the breaking into the units and the taking of this property to get it out, even in the absence of the occupants of these units.
I would correct you there, and remember, the sheriff of the court is the eviction. There's a court order. I can share the court order with your producers so you can go through it. When the court says we must evict, we have to do that. So the sheriff is the one leading this eviction process. And as I said, EMPD is here just to maintain law and order.
Help us understand what the law says about whether or not the people being evicted have to be, at the very least, assisted with finding alternative accommodation.
And I'm a communications expert, not a legal expert. I have read the court order. I can arrange that you speak to our legal team and maybe representatives from the Ekurhuleni Housing Company, but I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Okay, fair enough. Let me ask the question differently then. Is the City of Ekurhuleni concerned that the people who are going to be evicted or are being evicted today, because have no other alternatives, will essentially stay there, if not make it untenable for the other occupants who I imagine the city would try to get into those units?
The City of Ekurhuleni is concerned about holding and upholding the Constitution and law and order. Court has ordered an eviction. The sheriff is here today executing the eviction. And our role is to make sure that no one is hurt during this process and that there's no violence or protest or damage to public property during the eviction process.
All right. Is everybody who was staying in that particular property, let me ask the question this way. Has everybody who's been staying there lapsed on their payments and therefore are in the firing line for this particular eviction? In other words, are they people who have kept up with their payment and aren't being evicted today?
No, we are following the court order. It gives clear instructions of which buildings that need to be, there has to be an eviction taking place. So no one is being victimized. As I said, the person who is executing or the body that's executing these evictions.
All right, it looks like we've lost our connection to Phakamile Mbengashe, the head of communications with the City of Ekurhuleni. What a pity, because I think this question largely remains unanswered. As we watched the evictions take place, it seems that those who were effecting those particular evictions were doing so indiscriminately, and so the question is whether or not there are any people who are living in that property who in fact have managed to keep up with their rental payments and therefore I imagine should not be evicted. So the story, I suppose, in some ways is beginning to crystallize. The City of Ekurhuleni coming out to admit that in fact the Faroe Park residential complex is owned by the Metro itself. It is meant to be, I suppose, one of the low-cost housing options available to residents. The idea is that there is a subsidy being paid and some kind of rental income is also anticipated or expected from the residents who've taken occupation in those units. However, of course, that rent hasn't been forthcoming. Residents who we have spoken to admit that they haven't been able to pay through that rental income for the past couple of years. And the city is claiming that, in fact, they had given them notice that because they're not paying and because the city isn't getting their anticipated income, these evictions would have taken place. That notice, we're told, given to them in June already, and now the sheriff is effecting those particular evictions as per the court order. The question, of course, that still arises is whether or not there's any expectation that the people who are being evicted today should, in fact, be given alternative housing. And to be fair, I suppose that is a question that we can pose to legal experts who can help us make sense of what you do with this kind of scenario. Because on the one hand, whilst the city says they want to uphold the rule of law, you don't want to find yourself being at odds with the law because of certain procedural missteps. That's certainly my interpretation. We can't say for sure that that's what's taken place so far. But if other similar developments in the past are anything to go by, there are in some instances expectations that people who are being evicted in this way are A, given sufficient notice, and B, are helped in some ways to find some kind of alternatives, especially in a context where we're told some of these residents have been staying there for years, well over a decade. One might, I suppose, wonder whether that counts for anything. Phakamile Mbengashe is the head of communications with the City of Ekurhuleni. My apologies to you, Phakamile. We lost you as you were responding to the question around whether everybody who stays at Faroe Park had in fact defaulted on their rental payment and so were due for evictions today.
The issue is not about default on rental payments, Ayanda. Like I said, I will share the court order with you. The issue is about illegal occupation of these buildings. So the sheriff of the court is executing the eviction and he will be the capable authority to identify which buildings are being occupied illegally and be able to remove the residents from those buildings.
Okay, so if it's not about the rental payment, okay, we need to take a few steps back. When did the city realize that these buildings were being illegally occupied?
At some point, I think it must have been last year, the process was initiated. And as you know, that into court is a lengthy process. It was only in June 2025, this year, that we got a court order which enabled the sheriff of the court to evict these residents who are occupying these buildings in Farrell Park.
So these residents, some of them have told us that they've stayed there for well over a decade, and the city only realized last year that they'd taken illegal occupation.
Unfortunately, I cannot speak on behalf of those residents. What I can speak to is what the court judgment states and what the city has done in the interim to enable us to get this court order.
I'm asking these questions, Phakamile, because we're trying to connect the dots in as best a way as they can. For example, there was a resident who was even willing to produce a receipt that they had been paying their rent, and they too were being evicted from that particular area.
Like I said, it's one of those where it will turn into I said and they said. What I'm speaking to is a court order, and the court has identified and classified what is taking place in these Farrell Park buildings. And the court said that these buildings are being occupied illegally. And the sheriff of the court today has decided to execute the evictions. The MPD is here, SAPS is here, and they're supporting these evictions that are taking place right now.
Okay, so final question for me then, Phakamile. As far as you're concerned, all of this is happening within the confines of the law?
All of this is happening within the confines of the law as per the court order that was handed down on the 26th of June, 2025.
All right. Phakamile Mbengashe, we're going to have to leave it there for now. I imagine, of course, there'll be many other opportunities to ventilate some of the facts as soon as they arise and are confirmed. But for now, thanks very much. Phakamile Mbengashe is the head of communications with the City of Ekurhuleni, helping us understand, of course, what is taking place at the Farrell Park residential complex where these evictions are being effected. We are connecting the dots as they continue, I beg your pardon, connecting the story as it continues to unfold, especially given the fact that it seems at this stage there are conflicting version of events around how these residents got there and whether or not they had been staying there legally. Some residents telling us that they were told to pay some kind of rental fee as soon as they took occupation of that particular area. In fact, one resident saying that they were able to pay that rental fee as recently as last month. The city coming out, though, to say that as far as they're concerned, the court has made an assessment that some of these residents are staying in that area illegally and, in fact, is enforcing that order accordingly. We're going to bring up those visuals for you as we continue making sense of what's taking place there in Farrell Park. And in fact, as we do that, let me bring this to your attention. In an earlier broadcast, we alleged that the Red Ants, in fact, were responsible for the evictions here at Farrell Park. In fact, we'd now been made aware that the company was involved. We'd like to apologize. In fact, I beg your pardon, the company may have not been involved. We'd like to apologize for any prejudice that our statements may have made and acknowledge that the company has no connection to that particular incident. So once again, just a point of clarity as we continue making sense of this particular story. In earlier statements that we made, we had connected the Red Ants to these evictions. In fact, we have been now made aware that the company was not involved. And once again, extend our apologies for any prejudice that our statements may have made. In fact, and we also go as far as acknowledging that the company has no connection to what is taking place. So once again, making sense of the story as it continues to unfold.